Welcome back to another episode of PalisadeRadio.com. This is your host, Colin Cattell. Back on the program with us today is Mr. Gerald Celente, publisher of the Trends Journal. Gerald, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
The 2015 forecast was just released a few weeks back, and I'm sitting with a copy in front of me right now. The big theme of your journal from a financial perspective is what you're calling the grand manipulation, whereby all the markets have become manipulated. But Gerald, hasn't there always been manipulation in the market? Everyone talks about the manipulators, this elusive character pulling the strings from behind the curtain. But when pressed further, nobody can really identify who this person is. Can you provide our audience with the facts that you've found to back up these claims?
Yeah, it's right in front of everybody's eyes. All they have to do is look what the European Central Bank just did. They just announced that they're going to dump in some 60 billion euros a month to prop up the banks. But they use the line that they're going to do it to stop deflation. And the line that they use is that if people know the prices are going to go down, they're not going to buy stuff. So we got to get rid of deflation. All this is doing, it's going to enrich the already filthy rich. You saw the study that came out from Oxfam this week that showed 1% of the world's population, 1%, has as much dough as 99%. So let's look what quantitative easing has done. It's the manipulations in front of everybody. In the United States, the government pumped in about $7 trillion to prop up about $30 trillion worth of financial assets. So this time they started pumping, the markets moved from 8,000 to 18,000 today. Take a look what happened over there in Japan. They got a different name for it, Abenomics. Same thing, quantitative easing. What did they do? Pumped up the market to what, 57% in a year? Hey, what happened since Draghi just announced this thing? Hey, those European markets are at 7-year highs. And then you look at keep going up and down the line. And one of our other trends is called bankism. It all ties together. The central banks are in control. This is not capitalism. You know, I read these things, you could see what's going on, the decline, capitalism is... This is not capitalism. 4 words killed capitalism. Too big to fail. No such thing in capitalism. Does not happen. So it's bankism, and it's not only here. They're doing it over in China. Their real estate markets collapsed. They're just propping it up. And then you're looking at currencies around the world. Everybody's cutting their interest rates. You have negative interest rates in places like Denmark. So what they're doing is they're trying to defend their currencies on one end and lowering interest rates in hopes that that's going to spur growth. It has nothing to do with fighting deflation. It's called a depression, and it's global. So all this scam is just the banks pulling it off. And it's not only in banking with the manipulation. It's how they manipulate into war. Hey, did I ever tell you that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda? And that next cloud you see is going to be a mushroom cloud?
That's absolutely right. And since you bring up Saddam Hussein, one of the major disruptions that has began in earnest in the end of 2014 was the sharp sell-off in oil. A lot of mainstream analysts claim that a classic oversupply and under-demand created the falling oil price. But there's a more conspiratorial crowd that has emerged, and there's been a lot of theories that have come from that group. Some say that Saudi Arabia and the U.S. teamed up to take down Russia and Iran. Others claim Saudi Arabia is in fact trying to take out U.S. shale production. What does your gut feeling tell you?
Well, we've been on this since the beginning. Each night we do trends in the news. In part of the trends in the news, we follow gold prices, oil prices, and equity markets every day. So when oil hit $115 a barrel in June, the reason was that the destabilization in the Middle East increasing. That's when you started hearing the ISIS story. And then the Ukrainian civil war. And then prices started dropping. And I said to our audience, I said, something's wrong here. Prices should be going up. This is the height of the driving season. And then the reasons that you just mentioned, those were the first reasons that came out. And as I started looking at it deeper, this has nothing to do with it. It's supply and demand. I mentioned to you what's going on in Europe. They're trying to pump up the economy, deflation. I mentioned to you with the decline going on in China. It's not only oil prices. Copper prices are at 5.5-year lows. Nickel, iron ore, one after another. Demand is way down. There's a global slowdown. If the United States was behind any of this, they'd be cutting their own throat. And here's one of the reasons why. Out of the $1.3 trillion in junk bonds in the United States, it's estimated between 14 to 20% are in the energy field. You look at what's going on in Canada. As mentioned, they just lowered interest rates again, and now they've changed their forecast for growth, as has the whole IMF. It's a global slowdown. Again, goes back to grand manipulation. You have 1% of the people with 99% of the money. It's called supply and demand. The people don't have the money to buy the product. And that's why prices are going down across the board. You go to a retailer, 50-70% off before Christmas. This is unheard of. When I was a young guy, stuff went on 50% off, and it was after Christmas, and it was the junk they had left over. So it's too much product and not enough money.
I know you don't make predictions, but rather you forecast trends. And let's get as specific as possible because things are getting very hairy right now. I haven't seen so many bad situations coming to a head at one time ever. We now have the oil and copper prices declining, you mentioned. Central banks are losing trust in each other. QE spreading around the globe like a disease. Interest rates running negative. And then, of course, we have military conflict in Ukraine, parts of Africa, much of the Middle East. Do you see 2015 going right down the toilet, or will things continue for another year or 2 years in the status quo?
Well, it's always hard to say, and just for the reasons that you said, and that is that they come up with a scheme like, quantitative easing, and you see how it juices the markets. So they keep coming up with schemes to keep pumping things up. So this scheme has to run its course. And then what scheme will they come up with next? This thing should have collapsed 2-3 years ago. It's a Ponzi scheme. So I believe this is going to be the year. That is what I believe that the panic will hit in 2015. There are just too many things to cover up, and they can't do much more covering up. They don't have that many tools left. Before they announced this ECB plan for quantitative easing, the Financial Times did a poll of economists about 2 weeks ago. The vast majority said it wouldn't work. Because it shows it hasn't worked in Japan, it hasn't worked in the U.S., why should it work over there? It's not going to work. All it's going to do is pump the equity markets up. That's all they're interested in doing.
Gerald, have you thought much about what this global implosion will look like on a street level? I mean, are we talking riots in the street, poverty on a serious level, or is it a continuation of the money moving to the rich and essentially a depression playing out whereby the living standards of most people just continues to drop?
Well, it is a depression. That's what they're calling it, deflation. It's depression. That's why you have falling prices. And the living standard of people is dropping around the world. So why do you think, and I don't think it's a conspiracy theory, I believe it. You saw what happened in France. Oh, by the way, on Thursday, January 22nd, 34 people were slaughtered on a bus in the eastern region of Ukraine by the government that the Americans are supporting, the Kiev government, who overthrew the democratically elected government of Yanukovych. Didn't make the news. They're Eastern Europeans. Good thing they're not French, man. Kill, 12 of them. Now we got a story on our hands. But 34 in a bus, mostly elderly and kids. The hell with them. Nobody cares. So now what's happened in France and in Europe? It's a lockdown. They're passing more laws to rob people of more rights, just like they did in the United States when you had the Boston Marathon bombing. It made people stay in their house, and they declared effectively martial law. Went into houses warrantless, looking for one of the two kids. So what they're doing is they're using these incidents that when the event that people do take to the streets, they have everything in place to put them down. Look what's going on with the UKIP party in the UK, the Podemos in Spain, one after another, whether it's the Five-Star Movement in Italy or the Northern League. New parties in Germany, one after another. So that's what you're looking at here. You're looking at a lot of angry people. As I say, when people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it, ready to lose it. And the governments, going back to the grand manipulation, are using these so-called terror incidents to put the people into fear and hysteria and put the processes in place to put them down when the thing really starts coming down.
So I'm getting the feeling that you don't necessarily think this is going to be a very quick crash with a clean flush out of the system and then a healthy recovery to come. This is going to...
Oh, there's no recovery. There's no recovery. They can't have a recovery the way they're doing things. As I keep saying, the only way I see a recovery in the United States, and it's something that we're doing on May 2nd from Colonial Kingston, New York, where we're based, is honor thy founding fathers, and that means no foreign entanglements. It's what Eisenhower warned us about. And they've taken our dough. So it's time to rebuild America. That's the only way I see it. And what you're seeing going on with the sanctions against Russia may be a model to follow, and that's self-sustaining economies. And we're a country here of 320 million people. You think we can make our own shoes, shirts, computers, socks? Or are we too stupid? So that, to me, is the only way out. The way out is not for a central government and a central bank to manipulate the lives of people.
Okay, and in our last discussion, you talked about the concept of us entering World War III. This was over a year ago, and how it, in fact, had already begun. I had a couple listeners who were trolling on my YouTube page and claimed that your concept of World War III was a bit of a stretch and the facts were lacking. Can you touch on this a bit?
Well, not for the trolls, because I could care less what they think, but anybody that's half awake or watched Obama's State of the Union address can see the future. The United States is now at war with Syria. Hasn't been declared. Now they're bombing away. Troops are back in Iraq. Oh, yeah, we're just going there to save them Yazidis on the mountain, I tell you. And look what's going on in Syria. Yeah, that Nobel Peace Prize winner that's along with Sarkozy and Cameron started that war and overthrew its sovereign nation. Totally destabilized. Hey, troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen? Or are you too stupid? Hey, how about Bahrain? Beautiful over there, huh? Wonderful days over there in Nigeria. And Ukraine, it is just a picnic. Matter of fact, I was thinking of going there for a summer vacation. What, are they kidding or what? And you can see the spread. Listen to Obama's speech. He said the United States will effectively act unilaterally to do anything that it wants to do if he feels the United States or any of our allies are threatened. War breaking out in front of us. So then when they called a terror strike in France, now let's get this straight. There were two guys, they said, right? Two guys killed 12 people.
Right.
How many people did the United States, France, Germany, Italy, Australia, and other NATO allies kill in Afghanistan? How many did they kill in Iraq? Iraq, a war based on lies. Oh, in Iraq, over 1 million. Hey, but these are terrorists, I tell you. So you can see the hypocrisy. And what they're doing is this is merely the 10th crusade. I wrote about this in my book, Trends 2000, in 1996. A big book, a Warner book, national bestseller. I said you'd be waking up in the new millennium, and then it's the 10th crusade. That's all this is. ISIS, what's the name? Islamic State. Capisce? It's that simple. 2 letters, IS, and they get everybody to hate them. So, no, the world's at war. When's it gonna, all they and you can see it spreading. And you go throughout Africa, Sudan, one place after another, Somalia, Uganda. Go throughout it. To look at the decline. Again, the social unrest. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over in Greece with elections on Sunday. And again, look what's going on in Ukraine. And the United States has announced they're going to send, quote, advisors to Ukraine.
That's right. And have you had any further thoughts on how Ukraine-Russia-U.S. conflict might continue to play out in 2015? I know a lot of the surrounding Soviet bloc countries are starting to get a little bit concerned about Russia's actions, but that's a lot of U.S. media spin as well. What do you see playing out there?
They have to have peace. If it's not peace, it's going to be doom. And it's just going to be, it'll be bloody, and it'll spread. It'll spread over the eastern borders and western borders. These things aren't contained. I mean, you have this little guy, Yatsenyuk, and anybody that wants to put his name in and put Victoria Nuland, our Assistant Secretary of State, or Jeffrey Pyatt, P-Y-A-T-T, United States Ambassador to Ukraine. This is news to everybody. He said, this little boy, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine in World War II, not the Germans. This is Ukraine, where about 2.5 million people were put in German work camps, about 3 million of them slaughtered by the Germans. And he's saying the Russians did it. They're rewriting history right in front of everybody's eyes. Every week you hear Russian troops and Russian equipment is moving in to help the eastern Ukrainians fight Kiev. Every week. I haven't seen one photo in this world of selfies. Not one. And it's printed as though it's the truth. It's as true as I see it, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. So the wars are spreading, and so is the hatred. They have clearly, when a guy aligns himself with the Nazis like this, and people say that the government that the West prop up is Nazi-oriented, little boy Yats just proved it.
Okay, and finally, Gerald, let's talk about gold. Because in 2014, gold was the second best performing currency in the world behind the dollar. And now in 2015, gold is outperforming all other currencies. The Central Bank of Switzerland's move to unpeg from the euro last week sent some shockwaves through the market, sent a rush into gold. It kind of signals the central banks are losing faith in each other. More hysteria could break out in the coming months. Are we on the brink of a much anticipated breakout in the gold market?
It's difficult to say, again, because of the grand manipulation. I mentioned some of the manipulation. We know that they manipulated the interest rates, the LIBOR rates. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. Just nobody goes to jail, they pay a fine. We know that they're manipulating the Forex market, the currency markets, that's traded $5.3 trillion a day. Not a conspiracy theory, a fact. They got caught, they only pay fines. These guys never go to jail, only we do if we break the law. Are they manipulating gold? According to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, they are. And you mentioned, the demand for physical gold is at all-time highs. But what's going on? They're shorting the market with paper gold. So they've used the markets to trade thousands of contracts at low volume trading times, and it drives the price down. It's not in the best interest of the frauds, this illegal operation called central banks, to wake up the people that by lowering interest rates and pumping in trillions of dollars or euros worth of fake dough is devaluing their currency. Because that's why any person that believes that it's being devalued would go into gold. So if there's the big gold run, your quantitative easing doesn't work.
A lot of questions here, and only time will provide the answers. I encourage all of our listeners to visit trendsresearch.com, or is it trendsjournal.com?
Trendsjournal.com. And also, we have a 5.5-hour video that they could also, if they'd like to purchase that as well, beyond the Trends Journal, of the top trends for 2015 in detail. We had a live conference here. So we have conferences 4 times a year. And so this is the only magazine, I would say, where you're going to read history before it happens.
There you go, trendsjournal.com, everybody. Gerald, thanks so much for coming back on the program. Always a pleasure, and would be great to get you back on closer to the end of the year.
Oh, my pleasure as well, and thanks a lot, Colin.